Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll give a few minutes for folks to filter in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Great. Well, it looks like our number is stabilizing a bit, so we'll go ahead just in the interest of time and kick things off here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Louise Bedsworth. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment at Berkeley Law, or CLEE. As many of you know, CLEE is a research center within the law school that helps to link the expertise and creativity of the Berkeley Law community and really the broader campus into to bring pragmatic policy solutions to environmental challenges. We work with government, business, and the nonprofit sector to help solve urgent problems that require innovative and often interdisciplinary approaches. And we draw on the combined expertise of our faculty, staff, students, and many of the stakeholders that we collaborate with to really translate empirical findings into smart public policy solutions. Through our Lunch and Learn series, we host conversations on a range of topics, unpacking complex and pressing challenges and presenting new and innovative research findings. Our Lunch and Learn series is made possible through the support of our partners, Wilson Sonsini, Oric, and Hanson Bridget. Today's Lunch and Learn is really exciting because this also is a moment where we're launching a new initiative here at CLEE focused on equitable EV deployment. And so today I'm excited to have Ted Lamm, a senior fellow at CLEE, to moderate a discussion with some leaders in this field to talk about how we're going to be making this transition to zero-emission mobility. And so with that, I will turn it over to Ted to lead today's conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Louise. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And can I just get a confirmation that my slides are showing, Louise?
Yes, they are.
Awesome. All right. So as Louise said, we're here today to talk about equity in electric vehicle and more broadly electrified mobility and zero-emission mobility infrastructure. I know we all want to get to our three excellent guests today, so I'm going to spend just a few minutes going over some basics about electric vehicle policy in California, where we are today, what our targets are, and what are some of the challenges we know about in equitable deployment. So as many of you joining today are probably aware, late last year, actually a little while longer than that now, the California Air Resources Board put in place regulations that will phase out the sale of new internal combustion engines in California for light-duty vehicles by 2035. So all new vehicle sales after 2035 will be 100% zero-emission vehicles. That is largely electrified vehicles, but it might also include hydrogen vehicles. The state has made substantial progress in this move. At the end of last year, almost 19% of all new light-duty vehicles sold in California were electric vehicles. That's incredibly impressive, and it is far outpacing the rest of the nation. This is the result of a decade and more of electric vehicle and zero-emission vehicle policy. Since the middle of the Brown administration, governors successively have been setting electric vehicle targets, and the state has been meeting those targets or getting very close. The state has met those with mandates, like I just mentioned, through the California Air Resources Board, as well as incentive programs, vehicle rebates, vehicle trade-in policies, electric fuel, a low-carbon fuel standard that promotes the sale of electricity as a fuel, and infrastructure investments. Electric utilities, community choice aggregators, and local city programs have supplemented that, as well as the very prominent federal purchase rebates that we're all aware of that were recently extended in the Inflation Reduction Act. all this policy has existed for about a decade, as I said, and has moved us to about 19% EV sales. But the big question now is how this transition can be made equitable, given the fact that the state has set a firm phase-out timeline. So one thing that we do know is that charging infrastructure and vehicle adoption go hand in hand. This chart prepared by the ICCT shows that in California and around the country, the cities with the most chargers have the most electric vehicles. Now, there's a bit of a chicken and egg question there. Does San Jose have more chargers because it has more EVs or vice versa? But we know that one is absolutely necessary for the other. People need fueling infrastructure. But we also know there's a substantial equity gap. And the California Energy Commission has developed serious data that shows that in publicly accessible charging, higher income communities have a lot more access to charging than lower income communities. And this does not account for private charging, which we know is how most electric vehicle operators to date access their charging. Now, of course, private charging in private driveways and in private garages is going to be much more restricted to those who have access to private driveways and private garages, i.e. single-family homeowners. As we look at equity and we look at lower income and disadvantaged and underserved communities, those residents are much more likely to be living in multi-unit dwellings and lack access to that private charging. So the gap that we see in charging access is even greater when we take into account the access to private charging. We also know that vehicles are quite expensive, a lot of new models on the market, but they are, most of the first models that manufacturers are releasing are quite pricey, even with rebates. And Teslas, which have led the charge so far, make up more than half of all new EV sales to date in California. This number will go down over time, but we all know that Tesla is a relatively expensive vehicle. So we think we can sort of understand which Californians have had access to this transition so far and what needs to be done on the charging infrastructure side to address that problem. So that is where our new initiative comes in. And we here at CLEE are beginning a multi-year initiative to focus on strategies to ensure that all the new charging infrastructure that's needed for electric vehicles, and that includes cars and other electrified mobility, e-bikes, e-scooters, things like that, is done in a way that is equitable and meets the needs of all California communities. So we're going to be working on developing partnerships with individual California cities. We're going to be conducting mapping exercises to identify high priority and high access hotspots. We're going to be working on community engagement and outreach plans to connect residents of the identified communities with the plans that are going on at the city level. We're also going to try to connect with local governments, utilities, and EV supply providers to coordinate along with businesses in the actual financing and investment in this infrastructure. The goal will be to produce implementation guides, to produce action plans and assist local governments with their existing action plans and best practices to share around the state. Ideally, we'll be able to put that into a statewide resource hub that we're building on our website. And we may end up producing some legislative and policy proposals if we identify that what the state has done to date, including its more recent efforts on equity that I think Gia will talk about in a second, if we find that there are new state policies or programs that are in need to advance the ball even more. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our excellent panel, and we have 3 excellent panelists with us today, each with a wide range of experience in zero-emission mobility and equity solutions. I'm going to just introduce them very briefly, and then we'll shift over to their presentations. So first, we have Tiya Vacin. She's the Deputy Director of Zero-Emission Vehicle Market Development at the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, where she leads a team focused on zero-emission vehicle readiness, and promoting the state's incentive and permit streamlining efforts. Second, we'll hear from Michael Randolph. He's a transportation planner for the city of Oakland, where he led the development of the city's recently released zero-emission vehicle action plan, a plan that we're very excited to help the city work on. And he's now spearheading the first round of implementation, which will be a multi-year effort. And then last, we'll hear from Tiya Gordon. She's a co-founder and COO of It's Electric, where she's developing an innovative solution to curbside charging in dense urban areas with an initial focus on New York. And I know they're interested in many other jurisdictions as well. So we'll hear the private side at the end. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to Gia for her remarks. And thank you so much for joining us, Gia.
Thank you, Ted. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Sorry. I guess if you're in Hawaii, it's good morning. Let me see. Let me get my slides up here to share. Okay. How's that? Is that coming through? Yep.
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Okay, super. All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. I'm going to run through just a little bit about what's happening at the state level, kind of high level, and then hopefully we can get into some more specifics in our Q&A. But I always want to start with just a minute around GO-Biz. I think we run into a lot of folks who, if I could see all your hands, I'd ask you to raise your hand. How many people know what GO-Biz is and what we do? And I suspect it's probably a pretty small percentage. So, we are intended to be kind of a single point of contact, or the lead agency responsible for helping with business establishment and growth and job creation in the state. And so we have a lot of different free services that we provide, from small business assistance, international affairs and direct foreign investment. We have site selection, permitting assistance, my team, the zero emission vehicle market development team, which also helps with permitting, other kinds of things, the infrastructure bank. So I don't want to dwell on this, but just invite you to reach out to me or to anyone at GO-Biz if you think that there are things that we might be able to help with to help you in your business efforts and expansion goals here in the state. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, and Ted teed it up well in terms of, the broader context about where we are in the ZEV market and ZEV infrastructure. But I think just wanting to touch on, we know that California is very committed to climate action and to pollution reduction. And so we have, our latest North Star is really around carbon neutrality by 2045, 100% clean electric grid also by 2045. We have capture and remove carbon pollution also is a big piece of it. And then, of course, as Ted touched on, we have our executive order around getting to 100% zero emission vehicles for light duty passenger vehicles by 2035 and medium and heavy duty vehicles by 2045, with some variation in there. And so, coupled with that, we also have record funding commitments. And now I know that we recently in January had a bit of a revised budget. So this is from last year's budget. We'll see what happens as time goes forward. But nevertheless, I think even with what's been proposed this year, we still have record commitments in climate action. And you'll see there, zero emission vehicles are a big piece of that and remain a big focus for the administration and for the state. Oops, I'm missing a bunch of, let's see. Oh, I have animation in there. Let me just get these out. So just wanted to point people to, if you're not familiar with how are we going to get there, the scoping plan that CARB puts together around how we will achieve carbon neutrality by 2045, the 2022 scoping plan outlined that, and you'll see we're going to need, it's a big lift. We need 37 times the on-road ZEVs as we have today. And, I won't go through this, but you can look at it later when slides are provided. But it's to say that we have, a steep road ahead of us is an understatement, but we can do it. And so I wanted to get into a little bit just around ZEV equity, right? So equity in general is a huge focus of this administration, and it's included in a lot of different areas. So I'm going to focus in on how we're thinking about it in the ZEV space. But this is actually comes from some colleagues of ours at Caltrans that are working in partnership with a grantee that we have, Valley Clean Air Now. And so this isn't something that I created, but I really love it. And I think it's worth mentioning for a moment. So achieving equity is about access and affordability, I think, at its core. And across these three segments around the vehicle, the infrastructure, and the ability to be able to be in, have financial inclusion around how can these be affordable. So again, I think you can look at this later, but really around vehicles, can I buy or lease or share a car? Can I afford a car? Right? Do I have the infrastructure that I need? As Ted said, I think that there are limitations that we're seeing now around communities that may want to make the transition but can't due to lack of infrastructure. And can I afford to charge it? That's also really important. And so how do we address those kinds of barriers and limitations? And of course, does a financial system work for me? Do I have a bank account? Do I have good credit? Or there's this kind of notion of I guess financial mobility through mobility, right? So how can we think about financial ways in which we can help people achieve some of these kinds of inclusions? And so we're taking a multi-pronged approach, and I'm going to walk through 5 different areas that we are taking in the ZEV space. And so the first is this kind of high-level direction and focus. So we have the zero-emission vehicle market development strategy, which is led by GO-Biz, and we have a series of core principles. The first of which is equity in every decision, and so it's really around looking at how the lead agencies, what their objectives are in equity, and how they can think about incorporating that more deeply into their programs. It also directs us to create every year an equity engagement and implementation plan. And so you can find that on our website if you're interested in looking at it. And it breaks down in greater detail what every agency, there's 29 of them that touch ZEV, how they're thinking about equity, that's in the strategy, and then how do we think about having better engagement and implementation of equity. And then something that's newer and we're really excited about, on last year's legislative session, SB 1291 introduced a ZEV equity advocate, which will be housed at GO-Biz and will be really looking at how to ensure that equity principles and practices are embedded in California's policies and strategies, and kind of facilitating this a common definition and having more dedicated time for engagement with the groups and the communities that we are wanting to work with and help ensure better equity. Number 2 is funding. So it's been the largest investment in low income and disproportionately affected populations in California history. So just a couple of highlights. The Energy Commission has a clean transportation program. Their investment plan identifies 50% for priority populations, and to ensure, mostly this is around infrastructure deployment, so ensuring that there's more equity in that. And they have a number of different types of analyses they're doing to look at how to fill that in and where to go. Second, we have the 2022-23 funding plan that comes out of CARB for clean transportation incentives, and about 70% of that plan will benefit priority populations, and that's $2.6 billion. And then the CPUC has a $1 billion transportation electrification program, which is really for building ZEV charging infrastructure, EV infrastructure specifically, and there will be additional incentives for projects in hard to reach communities. Okay. The third area is around research and analysis to kind of understand barriers and opportunities better. So I've just listed here a few of the different kinds of groups that we have, and some of the legislation that's directing the state to better understand barriers and opportunities. And then the outcomes of those different groups and those reports are then incorporated into thinking about how that gets fed up into the plans that I had just talked about in terms of funding. Also, we're doing some awareness building and assistance. I think personally, the state has even more opportunity here. I think that it's a gap, and we need to be partnering with those trusted messengers and trusted partners in these communities to really help with awareness building and understanding. But I'll just mention 2 things quickly. So we have right now some consumer awareness grants that are focused on hard to reach and underrepresented communities. We're working with one grantee, Veloz, you may have heard of, that's doing a series of myth busting with mythological creatures, and it's pretty fun and pretty cute, and have a series of partners that will help ensure that the messaging is getting out that it was, first of all, a kind of appropriate and connecting with priority populations, and also in partnership with those to make sure those messages are actually being received by those communities through like media buys and things like that. And then we're also working with Valley Clean Air Now, which is doing kind of from the bottom up, really working with individual folks to the Clean Cars for All to turn in their old cars and get into a ZEV and help with the paperwork, and what does that mean, and how do you identify the right kind of car for you, and that type of thing. So it's been really successful. And then we have many other education and outreach tools, Access Clean California, as I mentioned, Veloz's Electric for All campaign and website, and others. And then another piece of this really around equity is ensuring that we have workforce and apprenticeship programs, and that there's just transition for those people that are working in the ZEV, in the fossil fuel-based industries and transitioning into a zero emission economy in the future. So listed a couple of things here where we have some roadmaps and training programs and things like that. But I think that lastly, just wanted to say that we have a massive lift ahead of us, as I've said, and these things alone will not get us there. We have a really complex system, and we must have partnerships to succeed, like CLEE's EV Equity Initiative. And so we really have to ensure that the solid foundations that we have and the systems that we put in place, hopefully at the state level, and the money that we have right now, are really indeed felt on the ground as they're intended in the communities that they're intended. And I think that that's where partnership and all of us working together is going to be the only way that we can do this. And so I think I'll stop there, and I really appreciate the time here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gia. And really appreciate that overview of everything that's going on at the state level. A tremendous number of programs across, like you said, a couple dozen agencies. And it's great that to have a GO-Biz representative who can speak to all of them, because I know you guys sit across a lot of those. Next, we're going to go to Michael Randolph from the city of Oakland, who's going to talk about their leading local approach to some of these issues. And just a brief note, we were going to do Q&A at the end of the session. So as your questions come up, please drop them in the Q&A function, and I will receive them, and then we can share in the panelist discussion toward the end. And with that, we'll pass over to Michael.
All right. I'll share my screen here. Okay. Just trying to just, all right. Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm Michael Randolph, transportation planner at the Oakland Department of Transportation, and one of the co-leads for our Zero Emission Vehicle Action Plan, ZEV plan for short. This is a plan we jointly created with the DOT and the Sustainability Division at Oakland, and we publicly released it earlier this year. So this plan was made possible by a Sustainable Communities grant from Caltrans, and was brought to fruition with the help of some amazing partners, the Spanish-Speaking Citizens Foundation, Transform, and West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. So why did Oakland create a zero-emission vehicle action plan? There are three major drivers. First, California, as we spoke earlier, California is moving aggressively on ZEV policy, no new gas vehicles and all ZEV freight drayage by 2035, 100% new buses ZEV by 2029, among others. However, the city of Oakland can't compel purchases or use, and can't regulate manufacturers or major retailers. What we can do is help to prepare our communities with the awareness, infrastructure, and access to absorb our share of the ZEV transition and, in fact, lead it, and to ensure that equity is the main driver in local implementation. Second, there is the 2030 Equitable Climate Action Plan, or ECAP for short, passed in 2020, and the city's goal of carbon neutrality by 2045. The specified climate equity targets, including for decarbonization and for ensuring frontline communities benefit first and foremost. The ZEV action plan was a specific action in the ECAP, and we were able to fulfill this specific mandate by passing the plan. Finally, right now, there is a deep inequity in regards to where ZEV infrastructure is located in the city of Oakland compared to which communities are affected first and worst by climate change and air pollution. ZEV transportation is a powerful equity tool. With EVs, you get rid of a major contributor to localized air pollution, you lower driver cost, you have more stable electricity prices than gas prices, and less lifetime maintenance and greater reliability. So staff has done an extensive analysis and created a story map to understand the equity landscape of zero-emission vehicles. On the left, you have one example of the harms from climate change. You can see the 880 freeway and flatlands pollution, and this does lead to lower life expectancy. On the right, we have EV ownership by zip code, so darker green equals more. It shows who's experiencing the benefits of EVs, that's the health, the lifetime savings, and these are the wealthier communities that are in the Oakland, that are in North Oakland and the Oakland Hills. So currently we haven't done a good job of equitable access in Oakland or anywhere. Same goes with electric vehicle charging infrastructure. There are very few in East Oakland and none in West Oakland, and these are communities in Oakland that are the highest burden of air pollution, as seen on the left. The plan devises actions to disrupt this inequity and eliminate barriers for access to clean transportation. So the plan also centers the city's sustainable mobility priorities. I'll set the stage with the hierarchy you see in the pyramid here. Oakland's goal is to, quote, help as many people and activities as possible get out of single occupancy vehicles, then electrify the rest. Active transportation, so that's walking, biking, and public transportation are the top priorities. For those that must use vehicles, that includes cars, trucks, and delivery vehicles, electrification is key. We want to acknowledge that focusing solely on EVs won't help us achieve our climate goals, and we want to make sure to not boost privately owned electric vehicles at the expense of these important other modes, and this is at the core of the strategies we develop. There are other documents that the city has created that focus on these other transportation priorities. So the Oakland Walks pedestrian plan, Let's Bike Oakland, and also city resolutions that center public transit. Right, getting back to the ZEB action plan, there are 6 topic areas existing in multifamily buildings, medium and heavy duty fleets, city leadership, electric micromobility. This includes e-scooters and e-bikes, curbside and public charging, and the zero-emission vehicle economy. So there are about 39 actions across these 6 different themes in the plan. And to talk about a little bit of the public engagement process we had for the plan. During the planning process, we had a series of 2 workshops created in partnership with Spanish Speaking Citizens Foundation, West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, and Transform. The first workshop series focused on identifying barriers to accessing ZEB and demystifying ZEBs through education and awareness. Then the second series of workshops focused on exploring draft strategies to address those barriers and to get feedback on the actions in the plan before a draft was finalized. We used both workshop series as opportunities to share information about ZEB incentives offered that can make owning a ZEB more affordable for low-income individuals. And additionally, I'll add that the workshops in Fruitvale were primarily in Spanish with interpretation for English speakers. We had both virtual and in-person workshops, and at the in-person events in Fruitvale, we partnered with Spanish Speaking Citizens Foundation to provide food, childcare, as well as test rides on e-scooters and in electric vehicles. All right, finally, what's next? That's the implementation of the plan itself. What are we doing now that the plan is approved and released? Well, we have a great new partnership with the Berkeley Center for Law and Energy and the Environment to specifically help us move on the public and curbside charging actions with the goal of bringing some updates to permitting and the municipal code in the next year. So those actions are amending the municipal code to facilitate and regulate EV charging in the public right-of-way, creating a residential curbside EV charging strategy and ordinance, develop and implement programs to deploy EV charging infrastructure in frontline communities, underserved communities in Oakland, and then studying the feasibility of subsidizing public charging for low-income use. So really excited to be working with CLEE. And for example, with action number 3, CLEE is helping us to build a map with many different variables to help identify specific locations we can prioritize in underserved neighborhoods for EV installation. And that's all for my presentation. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Really exciting to see this plan finally released in public and to see you guys getting started on just a handful of the many dozens of actions that I know are contained in there. I've got a lot of questions for you, but I'll hold them for a minute because we have one more speaker, Tiya Gordon from It's Electric, who's going to share some innovations that they are developing for some of the exact problems that Michael was just describing. Tiya?
Thank you so much, Ted. And that was a great presentation. I'm really excited about all of the alignments that are happening across the speakers today. Can you see my screen, everyone? Ted? Great. So my name is Tiya Gordon. I am the co-founder of It's Electric. We are curbside electric vehicle charging specifically built for cities. There are more than 40 million US drivers without driveways, without garages. This is a lot that was touched on earlier in today's presentations. And without that home charging convenience, owning an EV is expensive and it's inconvenient to charge. And that makes it out of the question for most city dwellers like myself. In fact, from this summer's JD Powers report, it's the shortage of public charging that's the #1 reason why vehicle shoppers reject EVs. And the Department of Energy is projecting for public level 2 charging the need for over 500,000 charge points by 2030. Currently, we have around 130,000 in the US. And, we're in the funnel. New York and 11 other states are, of course, following California's mandate. So the big question is, where are these 15 million EVs that are going to be on the road by 2030 going to charge? If you obviously live in the suburbs and you have that single family garage, it's very easy. You drive home, you pull into your garage, you plug in, you charge, you're good to go. If you live in the city, if you live in an underserved community, well, then it becomes a lot harder. We know from the research, strictly by the numbers, that the majority white tracts are about 1.5 times more likely than majority non-white tracts to have a public charger. And this is because charging companies are deploying where they project utilization to be the highest, given the costs that they have to recoup, not only for their hardware, but for the installation costs related to infrastructure. So hold that thought on infrastructure for a second. Because cities want to go electric. As we're hearing today, cities everywhere are writing their EV vision charging plans and setting their targets. New York, where I'm calling you from today, for example, has the target of having 10,000 curbside chargers by 2030. Currently, they have 100. Los Angeles has 4,000. London has 26,000. This is due to the fact that these two cities, LA and London, happen to have an accessory feed, meaning the power that runs to their lampposts and their streetlights that's already 240 volt, which is the right voltage already accessible for a level 2 charger. But the rest of the country, except for a few random instances, are all 120 volt. And this is that infrastructure block, and it takes time and it takes capital to upgrade, and that limits the deployment of charging stations. But the beauty of what we're building here at It's Electric is that same density that contributes to this barrier actually becomes the solution. Because most every building can power a level 2 EV charger, and we're very lucky that our cities are full of buildings. So what we do is deploy chargers using the power that's already there, directly from the adjacent building, regardless of typology, via a simple conduit that we run from the building just below the pavement, around 4 inches, to the public curb. Keep in mind, a level 2 charger, this is the same energy pull as an electric dryer or an electric oven that would be installed in that building. So we can install a charger in a matter of days anywhere that there's a building and a curb. What this avoids is the current process that takes on average 9 months for permitting and involves often street closures, trenching around 7 feet down, installations of transformers, installation of submeters. We avoid that time expense and we avoid that capital expense. The way that it works then like this: once that charger is installed, a driver pulls up, they execute their charge, whether or not, again, it's a 1 or 2 family house, it's a school, it's a house of worship, it's a commercial building. And then there's a submeter that we install, so that building never sees their electric bill go up. We pay that submeter bill directly, and then with the revenue that we collect, we share it with that property. We are looking to bring communities into interest in having EV charging in their neighborhoods. This solves the most difficult problems for us around curbside EV charging, which is time and cost. But the third, and the reason why I'm here today, is equity. When EV prices drop and new economy models come online in the next 2 years, with the exception of an eco warrior, no one is going to purchase an EV in a working class neighborhood such as Ridgewood or Newark or South Central or East Oakland or Crown Heights or Flushing unless they can walk out of their door and see that they can charge close to where they live. For us, it's not chicken or egg, it's all egg, as we like to say. And the plot continues to thicken. Here in New York, last month, our mayor stated that all city rideshare drivers will need to be electric by 2030. And most rideshare drivers live in the outer boroughs of the city, where right now only 16% of chargers exist. So our business model and the way we engineered our economics is to make us free to cities and free to building owners. This allows us to deploy without discrimination. We want to be able to install chargers in neighborhoods with low adoption rates or no adoption and encourage those drivers to go EV. And we also want to be able to install in wealthier neighborhoods where EV adoption rates are already skyrocketing. We are a community and design-centered approach, and this is built from our backgrounds. We feel that destination, meaning parking lot and public garage charging, is part of the equation, but we want everyone to have that sustainable ideal of an on-your-block level 2 overnight charge, regardless of median income or prevalence of a private driveway or a private garage. And for us, this helps us hit all of our beats, right? We want to be able to reduce carbon from our atmosphere. We want to have convenient options for people who live in neighborhoods, regardless of where those neighborhoods are located. And we want to help bring income into these communities to help them see the incentives of the green economy directly in their pockets. Thank you so much.
Tiya, thank you. That was fantastic. And so excited again to learn more about what you guys are working on. If we could have Gia and Michael rejoin us so we can start a little bit of Q&A. I'm going to kick it off with a couple of questions. And then if the audience members would love to have any questions, they can drop them in the Q&A. We've received a couple of questions so far, and I will get to those after I kick off with just a couple. So please, if you have questions, throw them into the Q&A, and then we will share them with the panelists. But I'm going to kick off with one. Tiya, at the end there, I think used the phrase, it's not chicken or egg, it's all egg. I think it was all egg, not all chicken. And that's something that we've been trying to think about a lot with our initiative. Our focus as well, we are thinking infrastructure first, given what we know local governments can assist with, and given what we know what we think drivers need in order to feel comfortable transitioning their vehicle. Michael, I'd love to just ask you how you guys in your Oakland plan development came to understand that curbside was a key slice of the equation, and sort of how you came to understand that and how you feel it addresses equity concerns in the city.
Right. So with curbside, I think the public right of way is, I guess, one of the areas where the city controls and has the most control to kind of bring more EV infrastructure to bear. That you have basically the like private land where people kind of can make their own decisions to install EV chargers, but we were kind of looking, okay, what does the city control? The city controls the public right of way. So how can we make it easier to install EV chargers in the public right of way? Where in the public right of way can we install chargers? And also, even before the plan, even before I started working at the city of Oakland, in my current position, there had been projects in the public right of way to install EV chargers. And so we had experience doing it. It took a very long time. Thinking this is specifically Lafayette Square in Old Oakland, there are some EV chargers at the curb. And then also during the planning process, we have another project like Park that opened up last year. And so trying to figure out what can we do to make these projects go faster as well. So that's kind of why the curb and public charging is so important, at least for this plan and what the city can actually do.
Tiya, anything you want to follow up on that front? Just how you guys came to understand that this was so essential?
I mean, that's really exciting to hear Michael say that curbside is key because cities have control of it. I like sort of the empowered approach that we're taking here and not relying on private entities to install on private lots. I think that for us, the biggest barrier that we face in deploying are finding city partners that are ready to take that step. And as Oakland has done, come up with the permitting pathway to understand how this can be deployed and how this can become, very much a revocable permit, or a way that's very clearly designed so that chargers can be deployed with speed and with scale. So for me, that's really incredible to hear. And for us, it was also, came down to the notion of destination charging as the viable solution. And for us, we define destination charging as when we're being asked as an EV driver or as an aspiring EV driver who does not have a garage to have to rely on going to a parking lot at a Walmart or Trader Joe's on the weekend and somehow waiting and building in several hours into our day for that charge, because a level 2 charge is the sustainable approach. It's what Gabe Klein of the Joint Office has said is most likely going to be the solution. I think 90% of all public charging will be level 2, and as opposed to level 3, is what we're all focused on. But at the same time, level 2 offers you around 25 miles per hour of charge. So, it's too much to ask your citizens to say you have to go to a Walmart parking lot and shop for 6 hours and then go back home. So we really want to be able to find solutions that allow for the same convenience that you would have at home, if you happen to park on the street and that's your home, you get that same convenience that you would in the suburbs.
Very, very insightful. Gia, anything from your perspective on the curbside approach that Tiya and Michael have been talking about, and that some but not all local governments in the state are focusing on?
I mean, I think just to say that I think that I agree that infrastructure is the thing to focus on. I mean, of course, we need vehicles, we need affordability. None of that's going to happen without infrastructure. So we're pretty keenly focused on that as well. And it's going to need to be a mix of level 2, level 1, DC fast charging, curbside, private. I mean, we need an all of the above approach. And so I think that partnerships with cities is a really great way to start. And yeah, I don't have more to add than yes to Michael and yes to Tiya.
Yeah, and on that point of just partnerships, to add, even when like the private sector or a private charging company is trying to take the lead to install in the curb, it's still a collaborative process. It's like things happen, things go wrong. Like for instance, with the Lake Park example, we found an underground storage tank, and that delayed the project for a year or more almost. And it is a public-private partnership, even when it's even if it is a private company leading, because we are working in the public right of way and with many complicated issues.
Absolutely. Well, I shouldn't have opened it up to the Q&A because we have far too many to answer in the next few minutes. So I'm gonna just jump right into some of these excellent questions that we're getting from the audience and hope to address as many as we can. The first question that I want to talk about is a couple of different questioners have asked about car sharing and non-individual private vehicle ownership models. How does car share, how does ride share, how does micro mobility fit into this equation? Recognizing, and this is something that we're very focused on in our initiative, that in some contexts, shifting from individual private vehicle to shared and micro mobility is appropriate, locally appropriate, and preferred, and saves a lot of emissions and time and money. But in other contexts, especially in California, the way we've developed, it is a non-starter. So how do we craft plans that push residents toward the most appropriate and lowest emitting modes, including shared and micromobility, without forcing anyone out of a mode that they rely on to get to and from work and to and from their services? Maybe Gia, do you want to start that off?
Yeah, I mean, our team focuses on zero emission vehicles, right? And I would say that really the focus should be, how do we get into, like what Michael was presenting, these preferred methods of transportation? And so a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think some of it is it needs to be available. If you think about places like Southern California, where you can't even walk to a corner store, right? So how do you get into a situation where you have good alternatives that are reliable and that people feel like they can get where they need to go in the time they need to be there? And so I think that feels like kind of one of the barriers for me is first ensuring that's available, and then making sure that people know that they can do it. I also think that there's a piece around, when I was talking about the sort of financial mobility side of things too, I think that there's an opportunity to think about how do we, what I'm thinking of is Caltrans and the integrated transportation program that they run is doing some looking at equity universal ZEV like charging cards, and that you could charge your car with it, you can ride transit with it, you can get on the metro with it. And how do we think about making it easier for people to use like multimodal types of transportation? And so yeah, I think that those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about.
And Tiya, curious if your model that you guys are developing could potentially encompass non-car charging in addition to standard vehicles.
That's a great question. So right now, our first objective is to make sure we can get that single port out there for charging a single vehicle in front of various properties. But I'm also very interested in how we could support the move towards modality in terms of micromobility. So, right here in New York, we have a bit of a conflict around the charging of e-bike batteries inside apartments. Last year, I think the FDMI reported there were about 85 fires caused by volatile subgrade e-bike batteries being charged in apartments. Many of those fatal because we're talking about lithium batteries. And it's a big challenge because a lot of these fires are caused by batteries on bikes being ridden by delivery workers. So how do we find solutions to charging e-bike batteries in exterior conditions that are convenient to where these people live in terms of the specific cohort of delivery workers? So what we're working on in terms of our roadmap for our product is the ability to have a second port that's 120 volt, so that there could be the charging of e-bike batteries on street. There's also a lot of other solutions out there in terms of battery banks, battery swapping that I know cities are looking into as well. And I think some of those are more economical as well in terms of being able to do more batteries at the same time, because it's a much lower energy pool than what we're talking about for an electric vehicle. But still, we're looking at that across the spectrum, so we can be able to support all types of mode of transportation. Because once we bring that data to the curb, there's a lot of different possibilities. Cities are also interested, again, in terms of curbside charging that has a very low profile, like what we offer, to be able to put in also sensors for civic IoT to understand pedestrian volume, to understand when a parking spot is available, to look at noise pollution, to look at air quality monitoring, and be able to capture all of that in that same piece of hardware that the charger is now available on.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Michael, since you showed your team's sort of pyramid approach, anything that you want to add on sort of directing residents toward more preferred or lower emitting modes?
Yeah, I think it's of course like very important. We have actions in the plan focused on car sharing, focused on e-bike mobility, e-bikes, and I think something that became very evident for me. We basically had to write this plan while we were trying to write the plan to figure out how to implement EV charging in underserved communities, while we were also implementing a project for EV charging in frontline underserved communities. And then I think I became to understand, we have the example of a project that we're working on right now, a PG&E charge grant at near the Lion Creek Crossings affordable housing development near Coliseum BART in East Oakland. And one of the partners that worked with us on the plan for public outreach, they have been working in this community on another grant, and they did a survey, and they understood that actually like no one in that community owns an electric vehicle. And so we were going to come in and just plop an EV charger down that at least initially at that point, no one was going to use, and they would not feel like it's for them, would not feel like it's for their community. They'd feel like you were completely ignoring their needs. With that said, we still know that like the EV transition is going to happen, and we want to make sure these amenities exist in these neighborhoods. And so what I think the strategy needs to be is pairing EV chargers with other amenities so that people understand that, so that people find it useful for them and can have a sense of ownership over it. So with this installation at Lion Creek Crossing, we're working with our partners ChargePoint and Carbon Solutions. We were able to offer education and awareness about ZEV incentives that people could take advantage of. We also were able, Carbon Solutions is going to provide low-cost leases for folks that live in this affordable housing development, with the expectation that eventually there's going to be an EV charger at this location. And I think other amenities like car share, like e-bike charging, are going to be very, very important, especially when we put these chargers in underserved communities, so that they're useful to the largest group of people. Yeah, so like that additional amenities piece is just going to be so important.
That I think makes a lot of sense, and it also gets at a question that was in the chat that I appear to have lost. I'm not sure if it was already answered, but there was a question regarding transition for oil and gas and fossil industry workers, and in particular in this conversation, people who currently own or work at fueling stations. And that's a lot of employment. That's a lot of community resources in certain areas around the state. And I'm curious, Gia, from your perspective at GO-Biz, it's a major business, the current fueling station business. Are there thoughts about how to help that industry transition, or to take some of the benefits that come from gas stations that also serve as lit and 24/7 operating service centers in certain communities, and it's making sure that service to the community is not lost, and that the people who work in those institutions have opportunities to continue doing that kind of work. Is that something you guys have talked about at GO-Biz?
Yeah, and it's something that's, I mean, I think this is where the one of the linkages between kind of equity and workforce too. Again, thinking about how do we look at a transition away from fossil based jobs and careers. I think there's, on one hand, we hear from gas stations, right? It's the convenience store that is the thing that makes all the money. It's not really the fuel. And so, I mean, this is one of the many arguments for why we are investing in more than one technology. We aren't just investing in battery electric vehicles. We're investing in hydrogen and fuel cell electric vehicles as well, which feel very much like a time and sort of behavior of a gas powered vehicle. So right now, those stations in California will be investing in at least 200, and there's kind of the sites are to have about 1,000 stations. I think this is like industry sites, 1,000 stations. And then there's also opportunities that really kind of when you get into heavier transportation, trucks and other kinds of things where hydrogen will play a role. So I think that kind of thinking around transitioning those folks, we have people that are gas station owners going, what's going to happen to my business? And we're saying, well, we can think about other kinds of ways to fuel. You can have hydrogen stations, you could have fast chargers, and so I think we do need to be thinking about those kinds of things when we are getting those questions. And then with regard to thinking about the workforce, I think I'll just say that, I mentioned in the January budget that there were some haircuts that happened, right, as the proposed budget. One thing that I had noticed that in the climate jobs category of the budget, it was completely untouched. The 100% of those funds were protected, and no proposal to cut anything from there. And so I think that that's kind of like displaced oil and gas workers, goods movement workforce, a pilot fund for displaced oil and gas workers. And so things like that are on the radar. And we have this expected behavior change from drivers that I think is a big ask in some ways, maybe not when you get used to it, but it feels like a barrier, I think, to a lot of people. And we're also asking for a real behavior change and a change in the way that people do business. And I think that we need to not underestimate what that might mean. So, how do we I don't have the answers to that yet, but it is something that we are thinking about and we'll need to be addressing.
And Michael, you pointed to in your response to that question as well to the just transition chapter in the ZEV action plan. Do you want to just say something very briefly on that component of the plan?
Yeah, I mean, that worry, kind of like what's going to happen from a job perspective, was something that was brought up repeatedly during public outreach for the plan. People are very worried about how to access the new jobs that are coming, but what will happen to the old ones. But not also from like the gas stations perspective, but also just like a cultural perspective. People that they know how to fix these type of cars, like a more informal economy, et cetera. And so there was definitely a clamor from Oakland residents that we think about this. And so in the ZEV economy part of the plan, we do talk about just transition, and a lot of the actions in that chapter will be led by kind of like the economic and workforce development department in Oakland, specifically kind of thinking about things like career fairs, education, fund and conduct a local economic assessment for the ZEV transition. So it's definitely something we're thinking about.
I just wanted to add something else. Michael made me think of this. So I mean, I guess my theme that keeps coming up in my mind here is partnerships, right? I think that we have a few other forcing functions in a positive way, right? The Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of thinking around requirements for being able to for climate projects, requirements around like comparable wage, requirements around how many hours have to be in apprenticeship. And so I think really looking at how do we transition that thinking around and what it means to have a zero emission related kind of job in the future, and partnerships with, the community colleges and other academic institutions. And there are efforts underway. CARB is looking at a contract to kind of get a lay of the land of what's happening around zero emission sort of vehicles or jobs, and how do we start thinking about transitioning the thinking to transferable skills, to making it exciting for people coming up through the youth coming up through high school, and thinking about the different job opportunities that they might have in the space. And so I think that's going to be really key going forward as well.
Absolutely. So we've only got just another minute or so here, and I want to ask one more question before we go to closing remarks. We've had a number of questions on funding and financing. How do we pay for it? And I want to start with you, Tiya, since your model is directly built on that. Can you just give a few thoughts on how we pay for this much infrastructure?
Exactly. So we are approaching this from the perspective that we don't want to have to upgrade infrastructure, because that cost is going to be prohibitive. And it's going to delay our deployment of these assets, and therefore it's going to delay the energy transition that we need to make. So our entire premise is built around using the infrastructure that's already there. There's still going to be the need for infrastructure upgrades around DCFC, around regional, around highway. But for us, we are really just that city-focused solution. And for us, there was a question in the chat I didn't have a chance to respond to yet. It's about how the fact that we do not need that infrastructure upgrade in a city, because the power is already properly converted to that 240 volt for most buildings in most cities. And in the case where, there's an older panel that can't support that, we don't need to install a charger in front of every single building in every single city. I believe what people are sort of looking at least in New York, is that when we're at mass adoption, when most vehicles on road are electric, it's a proposition of having one EV charging spot for every 10 parking spaces. So it's not a domino row of EV chargers as far as the eye can see. It's really those select spots on each block that then affords charging opportunity for those communities. So that's where we're really looking to find our solution, is to, again, make those partnerships with buildings that are willing to partner. I should also plug the fact that we have a wait list on our website for anyone that's interested, either from a building owner perspective or from a driver or an aspiring driver perspective. Please sign up so we can start to heat map when we start to pilot in various cities. And that's, for us, is our solution for infrastructure. The infrastructure upgrades will happen for the higher level chargers, for those DCFCs, but for level 2, our solution is upgrade free.
Great. Michael, just really quick on your end, anything on the public subsidy portion that you guys mentioned toward the end of your curbside charging remarks? Any thoughts on how we can pay for this?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of money and grants out there to kind of for cities to move forward on this infrastructure. I think, of course, the biggest barrier for us is, of course, just staff capacity to go for these grants. I think we're in the position now, we're hoping we can have more staff capacity in the future to specifically implement the plan, but we're supporting individuals that want to site infrastructure in the city of Oakland that are going for grants where we can. But I think it should only be thinking about the kind of like the financial support to get this infrastructure, but also just the staff support to get this infrastructure in place, but also to implement plans like the ZEB plan to do the fine work of changing how government works to make this work better. Mm-hmm. And that'll not only involve financing, but will just staff power, people power.
Absolutely. And maybe given the time, I'll just take it over to Gia to close out on this question. And what Michael points out, given all of the money available from the federal government, starting today with the announcement of the first round of EV charging funds going out the door for local governments, how is GO-Biz approaching local governments, tribal governments, access to these funds?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that we at the state are working together, collaborating. The the agencies are collaborating closely together. At GO-Biz, we have a team member who's dedicated to looking at the climate energy money, and where do we have opportunities, where are there gaps, like who's covering that, how can we, how do we want to try to capture as much of that money in the state as possible. And it is enormous. It is an enormous landscape. So great question. How do we spend this much money this fast? We need capacity. And another thing that we haven't touched on, which I think is really important, and we look at, is it's not just about getting the money out on the ground. It's what about permitting timelines? What about supply chain things? And so I think we need to be also looking at how do we speed up the pace at which we're able to deploy these projects too. And maybe I'll just leave it there.
Well, it's fantastic that you guys have the EV equity advocate coming on board to join all of those efforts across permitting and securing the funds from the federal government and outside sources. We've reached the hour mark, and this has been just a fantastic conversation. We have 27 unanswered questions in the chat, and I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all those. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I shared the link for our initiative in the chat if you do want to access more information or get in contact with me and the rest of the team about what we're doing here. And I want to say thank you very much to Gia and Michael and Tiya for presenting today, for sharing their excellent work, and for maybe working with us a little bit over the next year as we start this work. So thanks so much, and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye all.
Bye.